Yes, we are now going to host the third webinar of the WBAF Business School. I want to say hello to all participants. We have around 350 registrations now, and this session is also live on YouTube. I will introduce Professor Zink to you. I'm, by the way, the president of the World Business Angels Investment Forum, an affiliated partner of G20 for Global Partnership and Financial Inclusion, GPFI. Professor Zink is our board member, and he is the president of the Global Startup Committee. He is also president of World Entrepreneurship Forum based in France. He is a professor of innovation. His book in Singapore is and in the world is bestseller. And he was a parliament member of Singapore for 20 years. And he is now chairing the Nanyang Technology University corporate venture department, and he is also board member. But all these things together, let's put them to left side. I'm putting another thing to right side. He is one of the co-founders of as a matter of fact, founder of one of the first unicorns in the world around 20 years ago. He is very well known for his access to venture finance, $160 million after he established his startup venture in 6 months of time. If you want to learn how he did it, and if you want to learn more from Professor Zink, then you can visit wbaforum.org, where his video he was featured at the World Congress of Angel Investors last February is on. So I'm thanking so much to all participants of this roundtable. Kevin Heen, Secretary General of JCI Global from USA, dear Jacopo De Toni, Deputy Editor of FDI of the Financial Times, and dear Dr. Hashim Hussein, WBAF board member and also head of the Technology Transfer Office of UNIDO from Bahrain. I am saying goodbye now and leaving the floor to Professor Zink. He is going to moderate the session. 60 minutes later, they are also going to answer your questions. Please write your questions in the chat area. Mariam Najafi, who is Vice President of the Global Startup Committee, is going to moderate the chat part. If you have any question, please write them directly to Mariam, and all the best.
Okay, thank you, Baiwas. Thank you for the introduction. I want to also thank our fellow panelists today, Dr. Hashim Hussein, Mr. Kevin Heen, and Jacopo De Toni for joining us today. They are all thought leaders in their own right. Well, what a world it is today, what it has become. You know, this is something that none of us had imagined that we will see this kind of a scenario. We have seen many downturns. I've seen since the 85 recession, 97, 98 financial crisis in Asia, the global financial crisis, and a few more. And none of these downturns can compare to what we are seeing today, because this is global in nature. It never happened like this in the past. And so past lessons may not necessarily work, but all of us are entrepreneurs, experts in our area. And I hope that we will be able to hear from our panelists some ideas on how we can handle this issue. Entrepreneurs are also innovative. We'll find solutions, and it's very important that all of us share our ideas ideas as we go around. Now, I'll just start off by talking about what I think the global environment is going to look like. We will see three phases of this COVID-19 impact, in my opinion. Phase one will be the next 6 months. In the next 6 months, it will really be the chaos and the confusion caused by the health issues. The businesses coming to a halt, zero businesses for many companies. And we will see this being very devastating for many companies, especially for startups. Now, once the 6 months is over, as all of us get the virus in control, the next, from 6 months to the next 1 to 2 years, I think we will see a period of survival and collapse, where businesses, when they restart after the health crisis have been settled, they try to restart. Some of businesses have seen businesses drop 50%, 80%, some of them almost completely gone. For the next 1 to 2 years, we will see a period of companies trying to survive, and some of them will, and some of them will collapse. And how do they survive and how do they collapse? I hope that we can hear the views of our panelists today. And then the phase three will come 2 years later, where we will see the regrowth of companies that survive, and also the start of many more new, stronger startups that have learned how to navigate, understood the new environment, and have come up with new business models to compete in the new environment. And so I think these are the three phases that we're going to see. The bad news is that it's not a 6 months period. I think this is going to last more than 2 to 3 years, even longer. But you know, as we all have seen, whenever there are obstacles and problems, there are also opportunities. So we must look at the opportunities and see how we can survive this environment. Now, we have already introduced the three panelists, and I want to thank them for joining today. I will start off by asking a few questions before we go on to the Q&A sessions. The first question I want to ask our panelists, and I would like each of the panelists to introduce yourself again one more time when you start answering this question, and then also to spend about 5 minutes each to answer the question that I have. So the question I'd like to ask is that, you know, perhaps first of all, each of us is operating in a different environment. Can each one of you share the impact that you have seen of this environment on startups in your respective regions? What are the immediate challenges that startups are facing in your respective region? And what are startups telling you about the kind of help that they need? Maybe can we start with Kevin?
Yes, sure. Thank you very much, Professor Singh, and it's a great honor to be here. So I'd also like to take this advantage of this opportunity to salute all the JCI members who've tuned in to watch as well. I know that several of you are here as well. I just wanted to clarify one thing also before beginning, is that I'll be talking from a European perspective, because although I'm representing a United States-based global organization, I'm based in Monaco in Southern Europe, which means that I'll be talking about the situation in this part of the world where I'm actually located right now, although as you mentioned, this is a global pandemic, so lots of the situations are constant all around the world. The situation in Southern Europe, where I am based, is probably the most dramatic in the whole of Europe. As you know, I'm only like 300 or 350 kilometers from the European epicenter of the coronavirus crisis in northern Italy. So it's there've been very tragic situations, a high mortality rate, and which has led to strong government intervention all over the place. The same applies to France, and to where it's mainly the northeast of France, which is touched the most, and also to Spain as well. The Principality of Monaco, fortunately, hasn't been too badly touched. We've had 100 cases so far in the last 6 weeks, and three deaths, which is still quite bad. Now, how does this affect startups? I mean, we can start by doing a funnel about the whole economic situation. Of course, all businesses are obviously affected by the unsystematic risk, which is basically the economic factors that touch the whole ecosystem. So first of all, there's a credit crisis, there are logistical issues, linked to the lack of transport and lots of different external factors. The fact that offices are closed, and so are incubators as well. However, we've seen that startups so far in Monaco, for example, have been quite resilient in the sense that they've been quick to adapt and there's no panic situation. Obviously, startups which are in non-physical products, for example, IT or anything dematerialized or digital, have been able to adapt in a much more agile manner than startups which actually have physical products, such as prototypes, especially when they're coming from Asia or from the other sides of the world as well and needing to be spent. One constant which we have seen in this part of the world especially, and I think it's general, but especially in Southern Europe, has been the prevalence of strong government intervention all over the place, which, to give an example, in Monaco, for instance, small businesses in Monaco which make under 1.5 million euros in annual turnover, those of them which are strongly affected by the crisis with turnover less than 50% year on year, get a monthly subsidy of up to 5,000 euros a month, which is quite a big handout. And in terms of startups and very small companies like that, individual businesses get up to 1,800 euros. Like the startup and business owners get handouts of 1,800 euros, which is the equivalent of a minimum wage. Obviously, with favorable VAT refunds times and favorable social charges, rebates, and that sort of thing. But also rent subsidies as well, so tenants don't pay any rent in business centres. There's been lots of solidarity and corporate social responsibility in these areas. Now, naturally, and this is how I'm going to conclude, this government intervention, I think it's been going all over the place. Even governments deemed relatively right-wing, such as the Conservative Party government in the UK, for example, have actually put on quite a lot of government, have actually enhanced their welfare state over the last few weeks. I know that the UK budget a couple of weeks ago was had very high level of reinforcement for the National Health Service, which is normal given the urgent and exceptional situation that it is. But that's something where we do need to pay attention, however, how the welfare state and government intervention may seem great at this time, but everything must stay within reason. And this is something which I'll be developing afterwards. And obviously a welfare state needs to be compensated by high taxes, which are also fine if everybody is in a mood of solidarity and being united in this times of crisis. However, these high taxes must not be used in the future to cripple startups and entrepreneurship as well, and to stifle free enterprise. So this is something which we must pay attention to in the future as well. And with that, I'd like to conclude. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Jacopo, maybe you can come in next.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody from UK, London. Thank you very much, Barbars, for having me today. Thank you, Professor Singh. Always a pleasure and an honor to be on this now digital panel. From my perspective, from what we are seeing here in the UK, I'm afraid that in terms of challenges, I won't be very original. I guess that this is a very tough storm to for many startups, for most startups to cope with. Obviously, there are two elements to it. There is the healthcare element. Startups, and particularly leaders of startups, they have to deal with they have to be very sensitive to the fact that obviously their workforce is exposed to a national health emergency. And on top of that, everybody has to adjust to be working from home. So it's a big management challenge for the leaders themselves. But from also from an internal perspective, from a business perspective, Obviously, there are two sides of the coins. The business, startup businesses are under major stress. At the same time, obviously the funding options, the funding market is really tight at the moment. So again, it's a bit of a perfect storm for many startups out there. I pulled together a few numbers that give you an idea of what is the situation in the UK at the moment at the more micro level. Actually, they published a few researches very recently. This is a survey by a research firm called ProSapient. It's the statistical set of startups surveyed is limited to 200 startups, but they are representatives of their relative sectors. So basically, this survey finds that half of the startups are seeing declining. So all the startups are seeing declining revenues by about 50% on average. And even more importantly, they think that on average, they are having less than 6 months of runway left, even including cost-cutting measures. So again, pretty bleak scenario for most, for over half of the startups surveyed in this survey, and some of them even think that the runway they got left ahead is even shorter. Obviously, here the question is how to make that runway, how to stretch it beyond this short-term emergency. And the easy answer is through cutting costs as much as possible, and raise new funding. Cutting costs beyond the typical measures, but these are extraordinary times. So the government has made available a number of different tools. And so again, 50% of the startups surveyed in this survey said that they are resorting to the furlough scheme made available by the government, which basically allow them to put on hold, to suspend workers for 1-2 months, and the government will cover 80% of their salary. But the other nature of challenges that they are facing is obviously how to raise funding in this very tight market environment. And the reason why it's become more challenging is there are obviously several reasons. Valuations are down. Investors are trying to get more equity for their money. There is also evidence, even though this is fragmented, but there is also evidence of venture capitals pulling out at the very last minute on deals that had been negotiated already for months, or changing term sheets at the very last minute. So again, also from this perspective, some venture capitals seems to have behaved in a more volatile way, but I guess this is part of the game. Everybody's under great pressure and stress. And also, I guess another big change that we are seeing in the funding market is that up until a few months ago, it was a founder market in a way. Founders, there was plenty of capital around, and founders felt that they could actually choose between different funding options, and they felt that they had they could have the liberty in a way to decide what venture capital, what kind of investors they wanted to work with. Whereas now, obviously, the table has turned, so it's the other way around. It's an investors market. So now the leverage, investors have got much more leverage, which may lead to more investors-friendly deals. But yeah, on the funding issue, probably there will be time for me to elaborate a bit more later on.
Thank you. Dr. Hashim, maybe we can hear from you.
Yes, thank you very much for this interesting webinar. Well, I might talk from three angles. Me as the head of the UNIDO Investment Technology Promotion Office, and also as the director of the Arab International Center for Entrepreneurship and Investment, and as the chief executive of WEF, the World Entrepreneurs Investment Forum. Because nowadays we're having this multidisciplinary activities with different regions, but we are also working at the global level, which help us a lot. If I will start here from the Arab region, because we are in the mid of any activities related to startup or to entrepreneurship. From the beginning, we started making a survey. We started from Bahrain, then we went to Sudan, then Egypt, then Lebanon, then Tunisia, to see what are the most challenges and problems which are facing the entrepreneurs, especially the startups. We're talking now about survivals, and then we started to look after the mass of the COVID-19, but now how they can survive. Because it's very well known, most startups are very vulnerable in their first 3 years. And now with this disastrous situation, things are getting worse and worse. Of course, we have realized that most of this survey more or less are similar, what they're facing, the entrepreneurs in the region. Problems of paying rent, problems of paying their employees. Of course, most of those countries are locked out, so they cannot function. They cannot produce. Only some sectors, like in the IT or services, they're managing to work. But in some countries, for example, if I take Bahrain, we don't have a lockout. There are a lot of entrepreneurs. Their factories are working, their business is working. Some of the sectors, mainly the IT, is actually booming. Actually, I would say there are problems and difficulties for some startup at some sectors, and it is also a big opportunity coming for other startups, especially in the IT, in the advertisement, in the media, in the services. We realize that the business is gearing. The business actually is growing. In the medical, also we realize that there are a lot of entrepreneurs that started to develop businesses in the medical. The easiest is the mask, but there are so many other related activities which was missing in the region. So it was easier to get finance, quick finance, to start immediately. Today, for example, we have an entrepreneur which is starting a factory, which everything was shipped by air from China. So in 2 weeks' time, she will start manufacturing 3.5 million masks a month. Okay, and then other medical equipments. We have realized also governments, financial institutions that started to look into. Those are, I would say, maybe the problem which have been brought by the COVID-19, thinking about enterprises in the food security. So a lot of companies now started to look into developing more startups in the area of food and food manufacturing. This is, if I summarize, this is in the region. We are working starting working with BADIA, the Arab Bank for Development of Africa, where they have released a fund of $100 million to Africa, and mainly they want to look on the impact for SMEs, what are the impact and how they can be supported. So we'll start working with them on that. Within WEF, World Entrepreneurs Investment Forum, because it's already being agreed that the World Entrepreneurs Investment Forum major event is going to take place within the Dubai Expo 2020 in January, but things, of course, may be delayed. So we started discussing with the Arab League and the Arab Union of Chambers that we can start some activities which were supposed to be within the Dubai Expo to start preparing entrepreneurs. Mainly, we have a business plan rally competition for innovators, and we are putting one of the criteria or one of the sectors is solutions related to research in the COVID-19, I mean, from a medical point of view, and also economic solutions, what should be to be done to support the enhancement and the growth of the SMEs. So if we're talking about regional dimension, and we're talking about the international dimension. Also, we started an initiative with the banks to develop a fund from the private sector and the government to support ministries of health in the Arab countries, on all issues related to the COVID-19, but also to see how we can support and we can work in the survivals and the growth of the SMEs. Of course, we're talking now about survival, but the big problem is going to be for SMEs and mainly for access to finance. It will be on the aftermath, how they will continue their businesses. Nowadays, a lot of governments, they're giving a lot of packages, like rent subsidies, electricity, municipality taxes, even paying sometimes direct salaries of the employees. This is for the survivors. But the big problem will be is how they will pass that bridge after we calm down the coronavirus. I will stop here and then I will give examples in the second questions.
Okay, yeah, thank you so much. So as we can see, we have heard from the panelists that there are challenges but there are also opportunities. And as I mentioned when I started, that we see a three-phase thing. So the first 6 months is just surviving, and governments have stepped in all countries. I can see, even unlikely governments where they have put in salary support, they have put in tax returns, and put in rental support and so on. So all of these things will go away in 6 months to a year, and then we are going to phase 2, which is going to be the 1 to 2 years survival or collapse phase for companies. And so it is important that while companies think of surviving this first 6 months, which they probably will get through because of all the support, but they should very quickly now be thinking about the next 1 to 2 years, because that is going to determine whether they continue to live or collapse. So one of the questions that has come up, we heard from Jogopo just now on the survey about companies having a runway of 6 months or even less than that. And that is basically points to lack of financing. So in this environment, what now therefore becomes very important is for us to get creative on how companies and startups can find the money. As we have heard from Jogopo earlier, and many of us have seen, VCs who are ready to sign on the dotted line have just withdrawn. Those who have signed also have decided to withdraw. So deals are not getting through. And so what are the ways that we can suggest to startups on how they can increase their runway, look for money, not just from where they were looking, but from around the world? So can I hear your opinion from the panelists? Maybe I'll start with Jacopo. Jacopo, please, you start first, and then we'll hear from the rest.
Okay, sure. Actually, this is a very timely question, because right today the UK government has announced its new support scheme for startups. They established what they call the Future Fund. It's a £1 billion fund. It's half of it will be provided by the government, and half of it will be provided by the private sector. And there is a specific reason to that. I will address it later. Basically, what the fund does is providing convertible loans to startups. Loans can be from £125,000 all the way up to £5 million, and they just work as typical convertible loans. If the startup doesn't repay them, they will be converted into equity according to the ratio that has been initially agreed by the parties. The money will be can be used only to finance working capital functions purposes and not anything else. And the reason why I want to emphasize the fact that it's a public-private fund is that there was some debate in the industry here in the UK whether or not the state should be allowed to bail out many of these startups that are facing a very bleak business landscape. Obviously, there are arguments on both sides, but the argument from some venture capitalists that share the very strong opinions about this is that most of startups tend to fail anyways. I was reading some statistics. You're all familiar with that, but basically pretty much 3/4 of the startups, they get seed funding, they don't get to Series A funding. So in a way, there is already a very tough and cruel, if you may, natural selection in the startup world. And so the idea of bailing out, the whole universe of startups just for the sake of allowing them to get through this crisis also makes room for the idea that we are bailing out a lot of startups that might not be there anyways in 6 to 9 months time, even in normal circumstances. And obviously this is a sort of a dilemma that is even more relevant today, that public money has to be, we have to try to be efficient in the way we and the government spends its budget money. So this is why they decided to make it to have a private company. So basically, it will be the private sector to decide whether or not they are the company is eligible and deserve to be extended these convertible loans. And so the private component will be matched by a public component of the loan. So again, in terms of, I guess that this scheme captures a trend in the market that is, let's try to survive in the short term. How? Through convertible loans, short-term convertible loans, or other things. Alternative financing tools could be bridge loans. Could be raising additional additional funding from existing investors at valuations that flat valuations. So basically, try to bridge rounds at flat valuations to their last rounds, or maybe also tiny premiums, but no more than that. Even for those companies that since the last round of funding have had big revenue increases. And I guess that this is an interesting element because from the investors' perspective, investors, there could be a big room to even to raise funds focusing on these bridge loans. To invest in companies, de-risked companies that might just be needing desperately a short-term injection of cash to get through this period, but that have already showed that their business model is tested, is solid, and can survive in the long run. So I guess that this is what we are seeing, or personally I'm seeing in the market here in the UK. But yeah, definitely, looking forward to hearing what the other panelists are seeing.
Thank you. Dr. Hashim, can we hear from you? Your ideas, your suggestions? What should startup do in terms of increasing their runway?
Well, for me, I don't only look into finance or how they can generate funding, because the problem will be, especially if you're talking about industrialized, or you're talking about developing countries. I mean, startups in developing countries. I mainly focus on startups in developing countries, which they need finance, they need technology, provision. Those are two main things, and then they need, of course, market outlet for their products. So to generate finance, you have to ensure how you are going to promote and you are going to market your products. Most of the economies, especially in developing countries, it will suffer, of course, far more beyond industrialized countries. So to generate finance, you have to showcase and you have to prove that you're going to have market outlet. From another point of view is the technology provision, which is mainly coming from industrialized countries. When is the machinery and when are these factories are going to pick up to start providing this kind of technologies, machineries, the logistics, how this is going to be transported and when. Now we can see all the delays, what's happening right now. The more delays will be coming into the future. If you look into all of these complex problems, in the way we look into any investment cycle for a startup, I see a lot of difficulties is going to face startups in the southern hemisphere, in the developing world. But as I said, it is not the issue that is not going to be funding and finance. Finance will be there, it's going to be there from the private sector, it's going to be there from financial institutions. Is the issue how those startups will utilize this fund, how they will be able of utilizing these funds. But there are some cases, for example, if I will talk about Bahrain, now, for example, the government have delayed all loans for 6 months, no payment, no interest rate. Now they have developed a scheme program to make different program for different sectors. Well, they're looking for some sectors and some exclusive enterprises which they believe it will gear up with some clusters or some sectors, and it will also create more jobs. In Saudi Arabia, they're doing the same. They're putting big funding, sovereign fund. In Kuwait, they're doing the same. In United Arab Emirates is doing the same. So I would say the funding, for example, in these Gulf countries is not going to be the problem. Countries like other countries, I would say, like if you take about Sudan or you take about Yemen, or if you take countries like Syria or Iraq, this is going to be a big problem because of the conflicts, because of the problems which is happening now. If you take also a number of sub-Saharan countries, you will find the same. So the problem is more complicated than just assuring the access to finance. This is why now there are a lot of studies happening to see, because if you don't work, if you don't react or you don't act, those countries might collapse totally. Economically, totally they will collapse because you don't have the right cushion or right platform to help and sustain this startup, from access to finance, technology provision and technology adaptation, and market outlet for this product. So not only finance, there are so many other complicated issues is going to come on the way for developing countries.
Thank you, Dr. Hashim. Kevin, your views?
Yes, thank you very much. And I actually totally agree with Dr. Hussein's point of view that marketing is also a major factor. I mean, the question was about sometimes venture capital funds deciding not to do new deals for now. Naturally, that depends on the factor of systematic risk as well. Obviously, if a great opportunity arises in video conferencing or in pharmaceuticals or the medical sector, I'm sure their venture capital funds will be racing to find the money to subsidize that kind of company. So yes, there's a question of opportunism in terms of the decisions for venture capitalists to provide funds or not. But yes, and also I think it's important for potential investors to see the opportunities from this situation as well, try to project in the future and see how to reverse engineer the growth of it. What The options which startups are having now, there are quite a few in Southern Europe, at least, in the area. There's actually an opening in terms of 0% bank loans. It's much easier now to obtain finance and funding from banks, which was something which was totally unheard of in this part of the world up until now. And with low interest rates, of course, this is an advantage for potential economic growth in the future. I mentioned earlier government funding. There are also European Union and OECD funds as well, and strong cash flow support in France and Germany, notably on startups, that sort of thing. I also want to touch on some less formal support as well. This situation has found lots of entrepreneurial opportunities in terms of crowdfunding situations for example, social enterprises, which are talking on the short term right now, how to sustain economies right now. There have been lots of successful crowdfunding examples. And of course, there are cases of NGO support. For example, I had a question earlier from somebody in Iran about how, for example, organizations like JCI can help support startups. There's some good cases in point. For example, JCI is an NGO, but focusing on developing leadership skills in young people under 40 in terms of entrepreneurship, social entrepreneurship, and also personal development with an ethical leadership focus. And we're trying to find, we're actually partnering with government, civil society and businesses to create business plan contests, for example. Prime example in Monaco, the Monaco government is providing 61,000 euros in funds for startups this year, and it has done for the last 21 years. And there are lots of similar cases as well. For example, there's a startup accelerator process. There's a question from Cameroon about that earlier. Startup accelerators are something which is still taking place right now. There's we're in partnership with a Dutch accelerator called Get in the Ring, which is actually working on different projects around the world to help accelerate startups. And this is the time for investors to go into certain types of projects. Another project we're working on at JCI level, we have a fund right now called the Global Youth Empowerment Fund, which is focusing on sustainable development goals projects with the United Nations. So up to now, it's been used mainly to finance charity and community projects, but we're actually discussing with stakeholders to try to turn this to help the current situation and to support startups which encourage sustainable development goals as well and responsible social entrepreneurship and that kind of idea. So this is how I would suggest that startups can try to find NGO funding, and how non-government organizations like our own, like other economic-based NGOs and business-related NGOs can also help to support ethical business as well. And that's something which I am thinking of elaborating on later on too. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, maybe I'll share a bit of my experience. My first company, we started in 1997. That was in the middle of the Asian financial crisis. Asia was very badly hit. We started in 1997. Today, 23 years later, we are still running strong. We do business in Africa. My second business, I started in 1998, UTech, that's a unicorn that Baibas talked about. Also was in a very tough time, and today the company is still running, although I'm no longer running it. It's doing very, very well. My third company that I started was 2001. This was post.com crash. And the reason I bring this up is that I had a good experience of being able to raise funds in all of these post-crash periods, and all of them turn out to be companies that are possible. Now, how did I do it? I think first of all, my advice to startups would be that you have to go back into thinking about the day you started your company if you already started it. So go into the extreme startup mode and not focus on cash flow, but also on burn rate, how to extend the burn rate. The way I'm planning my business and I'm advising some of the startups here, don't think there's a 6 months thing. Think of it to be a 1 to 2 year drop of demand by 50 to 80%. So now you have to prepare yourselves on how you're going to survive this 1 to 2 years with that kind of demand drop, whether you can or you cannot raise funds, cut costs, whatever you have to do, go back into a low burn rate mode before you do it now. But as our panelists have said, there are always opportunities. So what did we do different that we managed to raise funds in that downturn was because we came up with business models were different from the rest. So I would advise startups to go back and relook at your business models and make them a lot more stronger, because there will still be VCs, there will still be angel investors who will come in and put in money, but you just have to be different from what you used to be. The norm has changed, it's a new normal, and if you can change it, I think, with new business model, look for new markets, new demand. And so for me, in 1997, when the Asian financial crisis hit, the new market that we looked for was Africa, and that was the right time for. So there are many ways that we can look for funds. Governments are great support, like UK. In Singapore, so far we have gone to help in paying for salaries and rentals and so on, but they have not gone into special funds to help startups. And I think we can learn from the UK example, encourage all regions to be thinking about how governments can come in to encourage the UK have set up. Now, I teach strategy in the university, and one of the topic I teach is a business plan. And when I teach business plan, I tell my students that most entrepreneurs forget to do is risk assessment and contingency planning, and they have to put that into their business plan. But this downturn is something that we have never seen in our lifetime, this coming. So Kevin, can I ask you, on your ideas on how entrepreneurs can change these challenges that they're facing into opportunities when they see such a unsystematic risk happening?
Yes, thank you, Professor Singh. Indeed, actually, those examples you were giving were great about how we can, even if we launch businesses in challenging times, we can still be successful. And hopefully the startups which are beginning now can also become unicorns like your company in the future. I think this is, obviously this is a tragic situation which nobody would have wanted us to be in, and nobody expected us to be in even 3 or 4 or 5 months ago at the turn of a new decade. But I always believe in thinking positive and looking at and thinking that this new decade can also be the opportunity for a new mindset and new opportunities as well. Obviously, startups do need to revisit their strategies as well, like all companies. And this situation has, if we take the example of large multinationals, for example, in the aviation industry, we know that several major airlines were planning to retire their their fleet of four-engined, long, wide-bodied planes like A380s or Boeing 747s. And given this crisis, they have been forced to accelerate their transformation and make major strategic shifts as well in order to save money. And this crisis has really pushed things over the edge, and there are unsustainable airlines, for example, which are even collapsing right now, just as was the case during 9/11, when companies like Swiss Air or Sabena in Belgium also collapsed straight afterwards. The advantage of startups in this case, depending on the sector they're in, of course, is that they're much more agile in dealing with unsystematic risk, and even some of them can even adapt to systematic risk and sector-specific risk as well. Let's not forget that startups have already been through a lot. They've been through funding challenges, they've had to work on their strategy, they've had to convince their investors. So I think that most successful startup owners who've already in their launch phase are already quite thick-skinned and can adapt. They're not as naive as some investors maybe think they are. And I do believe that some startup project bearers do know what they're doing. And of course, It's an opportunity, and where we can change these challenges into opportunities is to think forward about how the market will be and how demand will be. That goes back to Dr. Hussein's point about marketing. Where will we be in 2 years? What will be the new normal in 2 years' time? Try to, even though we don't have a crystal ball, we can still try to visualize where the market will be, and then try to reverse engineer back about how to establish our midterm and our short-term strategies to this new paradigm which is coming up. Of course, there's some sectors which are much more adapted to it than others and which can adapt much faster. I was having a discussion with some investors yesterday about the online education sector and how this simply accelerates the transformation of distance learning, using artificial intelligence and that sort of. There are already some investors who are developing their companies and accelerating their transformation even more now. Same in terms of wellness, online health and wellness platforms, and obviously we can't all be Zoom, but there are obviously lots of online communication platforms as well. Now, I do also want to stress one thing that I was saying before, is that unless there's a vaccine that's found relatively quickly, it won't be business as usual for at least 2 or 3 years. And there will be a new normal, and things won't necessarily come back to usual. We won't be, you see, even though schools are opening in countries like France soon, or in Denmark or Austria, restaurants and bars and hotels and the tourist industry, and also the aviation industry, of course, are going to be hugely affected. So this is an opportunity for businesses and startups notably to review their strategy and take a step back and review what's going on and take advantage of this new situation. What can be done? We've seen that there's this situation, this pandemic touches all sectors of society. It touches rich people, poor people, people from all sorts of different countries as well. Nobody is immune to the virus, of course, obviously in differing degrees. It's not a pandemic that discriminates on different economic sectors. And this has also led to a more caring society to a certain extent. And these are different things which we can take advantage on in the future to promote more ethical leadership. Going back to the UN Sustainable Development Goals, look at responsible consumption, focusing on local businesses, local production, lower carbon footprints, quality education, also very important, social entrepreneurship, financial inclusiveness, which is a point which I know that Chairman Baibars is putting a huge emphasis on at the World Business Angels Forum as well. Also, the topics of female entrepreneurship and gender equality in society. These are things which we can also, which angel investors and venture capitalists can also think about, which will become the new normal as well in the future. To give an example of what JCI is doing on that front as well, JCI Switzerland, which is one of the leading European national organizations with plenty of local entrepreneurs, have been pushing through a campaign to think global but to buy local, which is all about buying vouchers for local shops to be able to reinvest afterwards, and which helps emphasize their cash flow. So this has actually, JCI Switzerland has raised 1 million Swiss francs in the last month, and the campaign has been able to touch 350 local shop owners in the canton of Freiburg, in the Valais region, in the city of Freiburg. So these are examples of how we can all play our parts in revisiting strategy, turning challenges into new opportunities, which will help build a better society and a more caring society in the future, but which will also help create a better bottom line, better turnover, and better profits. And this is how we're trying to project ourselves over the next 2 years to try to establish what the new normal will be. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Jacopo, I want to ask you, you write about these things in the Financial Times. We are already seeing, and we'll no doubt see many more economies in the world that will collapse soon. But pre this COVID period, many governments around the world, many regions around the world had set up very good ecosystem to support startups. And this ecosystem include not just where financing gets done more efficiently, but also many other things that support a good entrepreneurship ecosystem, mentorship, market accessibility, and so on. Now, with the economies collapsing, what do you see happening to the ecosystems around the world? Are these going to collapse? And are we going to see the emergence of new things? What can we do to save the ecosystem that are running very well?
Yeah, well, thanks for the question. I think that ecosystems will not collapse because to some extent failure is embedded in the startup community, in startup ecosystems. And Kevin had a great point. Entrepreneurs have seen it already. They are, since the very early stage of their entrepreneurial career, they had to deal with the ups and downs of being an entrepreneur. And actually this goes much farther than just being an entrepreneur. I was speaking very recently to Dr. Michael Freeman. He's a professor of a psychiatrist and a professor of psychology in California, and he has studied the mind of entrepreneurs for many years. And he also confirmed that entrepreneurs, on the one hand, they might be more exposed to mental conditions like anxiety or even depression, because being an entrepreneur is tough. But at the same time, they tend to be more resilient to the ups and downs of their businesses. Obviously, they tend to be more resilient to the ups and downs of the markets, the businesses that they are dealing with. They probably are less trained to deal with this incredible systematic risk that we are facing today. But still, it's sort of, their skills, their resilience may well translate into a resilience to deal also with systematic risk. And this doesn't mean that startups will not fail. This means that entrepreneurs will have the resilience to come back quicker than legacy industries or entrepreneurs in traditional industries. So I guess that if you look at ecosystems, if you look at the pillars of startup ecosystems like talent, I see talent remaining there. I see entrepreneurs being able to adapt and to adjust, because it's part of being an entrepreneur to be able to adapt and adjust. Obviously, again, we don't know what the new normal is going to look like. Actually, this it's a global pandemic, but we are already seeing very different realities of very different. It's a different situation country by country. I imagine that in Singapore, you are experiencing something very different from what we are experiencing today here in London, where we are going into the fourth week of lockdown. Places like Italy or Spain have experienced a much stricter lockdown, whereas places like Sweden, it's a much more voluntary lockdown. So again, there are differences to be made. We don't know what the new normal will be, and we don't know what the normal is today in different countries. But certainly, entrepreneurs, I believe they will be able to adjust. Ecosystems will survive. And also there is also a very good reason at the policy level to support the survival of startup ecosystems in this particular market environment. And this goes back to something that Professor Singh, you highlighted in your own experience. You launched one of your companies during the Asian crisis. And there is strong evidence that in the wake of, for example, the last crisis, the global financial crisis, it was startups that drove the recovery, that emerged at the forefront of economic recovery, particularly in terms of job creation. If you look back at the past 15 years, it was startups that by far and large created more net jobs than more established and legacy industries. So also from a policymaker perspective, there are all the incentives in place for policymakers to keep to support startup ecosystems in these very testing weeks. Obviously, there will be again also adjustments will be needed, not just at the company level, but also at the ecosystem level. For example, I wonder how in this new world that we are sort of trying to figure out how will talent availability look like. Places like London, I guess, or Singapore, New York, Berlin, they have thrived because they managed to attract talent from all over the globe. But frankly, my personal view is that we will not go back to a normality in traveling. Traveling will probably be the last thing that will be resumed as we were used to just up until 3 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago. So it might be more difficult to attract talent from faraway places. For a city like London, it might be more difficult to attract talent from all over the world. So it really becomes more of a question of developing your own talent. At the same time, you may see a big push or an argument for the development of startup ecosystems in tier 2 or tier 3 cities, because if working from home is here to stay, then there will be a big incentives for young professionals to leave the mega cities, again, like the Londons, the New Yorks. Obviously, for financial reasons, it's much cheaper to rent a place in a place like, if I look at the UK, Brighton, Bristol, Birmingham. And therefore, if I don't have to go to the office every day or commute to the office, why not move somewhere else where I can get a better quality of life and still retain my job, which is going to be mostly digital. And this works for potential entrepreneurs, but also for potential investors. So once there is a movement out of big cities, there might be the case for people to set up ecosystems in places where ecosystems, there was not such a strong case for development of ecosystem before this COVID crisis. So I guess that these are some of the scenarios that I got in mind, but my answer to your question is not, startup ecosystems will not disappear. On the contrary, in fact, it's in the interest of everybody to keep them, to support them in this phase, because the startups will be leading the recovery.
Thank you. In fact, there may be a new model of how ecosystems in the different regions can connect together, and it becomes now easier to connect because we have learned how to work without traveling to one another's location. So new models of ecosystem cooperation, maybe not depending too much on government to support it, but among the different ecosystem that can support each other, and that could actually provide a new basis of how future startups will look like. And and you brought up another very, very good point that after the past crisis, every time after a past crisis was startups that drove the economy of the future. And I think this time around we'll see a lot more at the much larger scale of the overall contribution of startups to the economy in job creation will be a lot more bigger than what we used to see in the past. One final question to Dr. Hashim before we go to the Q&A session. I want to ask Dr. Hashim, he's very experienced in promoting entrepreneurship and SMEs. In your opinion, Dr. Hashim, who and which type of startups and companies are the most vulnerable in this great depression or great disruption that we are seeing? And which ones will survive this disruption and come out stronger? And what can startups do to survive? Can you share your ideas?
Well, I don't know what to answer. There is not going to be any startup which is not going to be affected from this disaster. It's all across the board. But I would say startup with a good quality entrepreneur, because the entrepreneur who is the one who's driving the enterprise. The more you have a solid and you have the good skills of an entrepreneur, he will go forward with his enterprise. He may need to do a lot of changes in the business. He might change the business. He might not continue the same kind of business. I feel obliged that I will talk about entrepreneurs in developing countries, you know, vis-a-vis, well, I work at the global level, but now I think it's better for the audience I talk about entrepreneurs in the developing world. Well, from another angle, you know, what we see now is unprecedented, you know, the lockdown of each country. Each country has locked its boundaries, called its people to come back, to make sure that they're providing all the support they're providing to, I mean, medical support. But what's going to happen after that? Are we going to do trade barriers block? We are going to carry, you know, the same setup, because all of those countries, the US or France or Japan, they're all going to suffer, you know, especially their SMEs. So what's going to do? The best thing what they will do, they will start working on protecting, you know, the emerging back of their SMEs. How this is going to be impacted and reflected in developing countries, you know? Entrepreneur, even whatever they will do, even policies, strategies, you know, their market outlet was all going to be global, as global entrepreneurs. But what I'm saying to entrepreneurs in developing countries, it is a golden opportunity for you, because you have the resources, you have the local market, and even you can develop your own regional market. It is not going to be a problem of access to finance. A good entrepreneur with a good enterprise or an idea for an enterprise, he wouldn't have a problem, or she wouldn't have a problem for access to finance. If entrepreneurs in developing countries, especially, I think one of the good things which this virus is bringing is it is pushing us forward toward the digital revolution, you know, which is happening, which we are there in the midst of the digital revolution. And we were always being asking the question, how entrepreneurs in developing countries, they will benefit from this fourth industrial revolution or digital revolution. As Kevin have said, for example, he have said e-learning. Now we are, as I said in the beginning of this, I said, now we are learning a lot from webinars. We have been traveling through, psychologically, we were only doing webinars or conference calls, Skype calls, if we really obliged to do it. You know, we never thought to do, I was just attending in the last few days, full conferences, a full conference online. Very easy, very practical, you know? And I was finding, okay, why we have not been doing this before? Even our staff meeting now is all from their homes, and we are doing the staff meeting as we're in the office. Nothing changed. We are doing a lot of counseling to entrepreneurs online, not only in Bahrain, in Morocco, in Tunisia, in Egypt, in Sudan. Very normal, you know. We do the online, and immediately we start doing questions and answers and so on. So I think there's going to be a big room for entrepreneurs to chip in to develop their businesses. They may divert from their business, from their existing business. If you have a good entrepreneur, and I have seen hundreds of entrepreneurs through different crises, they have changed their businesses, they have developed a new business plan, and they became very successful. So I think the lockdown of countries, the health reasoning, and it's going to be economic reasoning, because all of those countries, especially in the industrialized countries, for the coming year or 2 or 3 years, they will be looking in, they will be moving from survivals, you know, to growth and sustainability of their SMEs, because they need to create jobs. This de facto will impact and will affect entrepreneurs in developing countries. So I believe more and more now, this is why I'm saying we're talking to different partners on how we will support and I'm sure we are going to do a good job in developing countries. And mainly if I talk about the Arab region and in Africa, if we manage to enhance the ecosystem, if the governments, the policymakers, the practitioners, they utilize, this crisis to ensure that they're making a well-coherent ecosystem for the creation of startup and sustainability of the startups, from financial to non-financial support institutions, to government bodies, to the private sector, to the chambers, to the education system, to universities. If we will manage to ensure that we're bringing the right ecosystem to ensure that we're getting out of this crisis, I think entrepreneurs in developing countries, they will find out this was a very good opportunity and a very good challenge to come at the right time so that they can grow with their economies at the national and at the regional level.
Thank you, Dr. Hashim. That's a very good way to end our part of the discussion, that there are opportunities at all times. So entrepreneurs should look out for those opportunities and find the right business models that will make you attractive enough to be able to find the money. So now, Mariam, we can go to the Q&A. So you want to send some questions that have been asked?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for the very valuable knowledge and experience shared by you. We have quite lots of questions here. Some of the questions were covered, so I'm going to just skip from them. We have a question here from Muhammad, and he has asked about evaluation models that can work with COVID-19 and how the intrinsic value of the genuine startups been calculated to continue investing on them.
So question is, how do we see the valuation models changing during this period? Any of the panelists want to take this up?
Yeah, exactly.
Anyone? Volunteers?
I can just, okay.
Yeah, I mean, I've raised money during crisis period before, and I think we cannot expect valuations to remain the same as pre-crisis, especially when there was a lot of money chasing projects. During the dot-com days, as I remember, and many other good days, valuations increased tremendously. So I think we cannot expect that kind of valuations to remain. But at the same time, it does not mean that entrepreneurs should give away their startups for free. So you have to go back to the basic of valuation. I mean, some of the models may not work anymore, but I think you can go and look at the intrinsic value that you have, the IP that you have, the talent that you have, the market that you have, the traction that you have developed. And I think based on all of that, these are intangibles that should be valued into valuing your company. Do not just get into a trap of valuing the company based on financial, on revenues and on sales, because this is not realistic. It's not representative of what is going to happen 5-10 years down the road. So this cannot be the kind of valuation models that can be used today. Any other panelists want to try to answer this question?
I think Jacopo, you want it?
I think Professor Singh already said it all. Also because it's, I mean, if you take a model like based on discounted cash flows, at the moment, many companies are facing a zero revenue scenario. So there are actually no cash flows to discount, and it's difficult to figure out when there will be cash flows to discount. So it's, I guess, financing in this particular moment in time will have to be focused on keeping good businesses alive, and then once this short-term emergency sort of like subsides, it will be time to think about financial modeling and how to fine-tune them to the new normality that we will be facing.
If I may, if I may just perhaps add to the points raised by Professor Singh, it's the intrinsic talent will be very important in defining the value of any business, and there will be to a certain degree some form of natural selection in terms of the startups which do survive and the next 3 to 6 months, and those which are in the next phase, which Professor Singh stated before, which is like over 1 or 2 years to see which ones do grow and which ones do collapse afterwards. So there'll be 2 phases where we'll be able to see, and only the strongest will survive in this case. It's a case of survival of the fittest to a certain degree. And it will simplify the valuation models, of course, in the future.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, Madam, next question.
Yeah, for sure. We have a question from Patrick De Sources. He has asked, what do you think will be the post-COVID-19 impact on countries where the startup ecosystem was already weak? What do you foresee in the next 90 days? Best case scenario and worst case scenario. Do they have to think about putting together a resilience plan? What about a country like Haiti?
Dr. Hashim, you want to attempt that question?
Well, I think I have already illustrated into that, yes. Unfortunately, it's going to be a big crisis because today they have zero cash flow. Governments, they didn't have any contingency plans to support their SMEs. Big problem is going to happen. You know, entrepreneurs always have to face realities. We're not here to provide compliments. It's going to be a very difficult timing if you know the big corporates, if countries, if the World Bank, IMF, you know, big businesses like Bill Gates and others, they have started to talk about fighting the disease. Fighting the disease, yes, it is required. But if, because countries like Haiti, you know, most of these LDCs countries and also other developing countries, they cannot do it on their own. They are not going to be able of doing it on their own. Just the World Health Organization a few days back have announced that, for example, Africa needs about $100 billion just for ensuring that they will pass the corona pandemic. They didn't talk yet about the economic requirement. So there's going to be a lot of, and this is why I mentioned that lockdown of countries, mainly if I talk about Europe or I talk about North America or even some Asian countries, and leaving the other countries behind is not going to work. It's going to create more problems for the economy of the world. So in the coming 90 days, if I'm going to be precise, I don't see quick solutions is going to happen. It will take some time. My message to the entrepreneurs, they have to adapt. They have to see how to survive, but I don't think anything could happen in the coming 90 days to support entrepreneurs in developing countries and LDCs if nothing is going to happen within the country. But the lesson learned, they're going to emerge. They should emerge stronger because countries have to adapt right ecosystems to support startup and growth and nurturing of enterprises. And this is what we are trying to work, and this is what we're trying to do for the future ecosystems of entrepreneurs in developing countries.
Thank you. Jacopo, Kevin, you want to add anything to this?
Yes, I definitely agree with Dr. Hussein that it will be, to use the words of our Prime Minister from a few weeks back, it will get worse before it gets better. And certainly so. I wouldn't just say, I wouldn't make a distinction between developing and developed countries. I would make a distinction between countries that with fiscal room to maneuver their budget and countries without that fiscal room. If you look at some Southern European countries, the situation looks bleak for a few of them, regardless of the fact that it can be considered developed or industrialized or not.
Here we're talking about countries with fragile ecosystem. This is mainly the question. You know, and this is why I was talking about the countries of the South, because most of them are fragile ecosystem. This was the question of the audience.
Yeah, yeah, and yeah, I agree with the idea that it's gonna be tough, but it could also be an opportunity for those countries that got the right digital infrastructure in place to strengthen their connection, their networks. Again, also working from home is also an opportunity for big outsourcing locations to strengthen their role as a center for ICT, exporting ICT services, and then a service related to this new emerging, it's not new, but a growing digital economy.
Thank you. Kevin, you want to say something?
Yes, just briefly. I think there are lots of questions that were touched on, but of answers that were touched on already to this question. But I want to go back to the initial question, which was the situation in 90 days. I think over the next 90 days, the main priority will be the health crisis and dealing with that. The current crisis can be divided into three major implications. The first is sanitary and health. The second is psychological as well, with the mental health effects of lockdown, which shouldn't be underestimated in terms of the impact it can have on GDP as well. And the third is economic. So the three are interlinked, but of course, the sanitary crisis, the containment of a virus linked to containment should remain the priority over the next 90 days. And a prime example, in 90 days time, we're looking at mid-July. You can see like at JCI, we organize plenty of events, and right now events taking place, and it's also the case all around the world. The Monaco Grand Prix got cancelled, and afterwards the French Tennis Open got cancelled in June, and then Wimbledon in July, and they're all falling like dominoes right now. So we're still looking at these kind of implications. What kind of situation will we be in 90 days? At this point in time, there might still be a pandemic in several countries. We don't know if there's going to be a second wave yet. In Asia, will there be a second wave in Europe, in Italy, if countries come out, or in Europe, or if countries like Denmark or Austria come out of confinement too quickly as well, and it will just go back to, it'll just be a recess and go back to square one again. So it all depends on policymakers to see what the situation of how startups will deal with. But I think most policymakers will still have a hands full over the next 90 days in making sure that the vulnerable people in the population do not die. And that startups, unfortunately, won't be the #1 priority in this case.
Can I just, when I started our discussion, I said that this is going to last 6 months. So in 90 days, I think nothing new will happen in terms of the ecosystems. We'll see this dragging on for some time. Second waves and third waves may come. Singapore is seeing the second wave right now. Hopefully we can settle that. But one experience I have is in 2001, when when the dot-com bubble burst and we faced a recession in this part of the world, we realized that our ecosystem for startup was not good enough. And so we took the opportunity to completely revamp the whole ecosystem of how we're going to support entrepreneurship. We created this organization called the Action Committee for Entrepreneurship, where the private sector got involved. Government no longer drove some of these activities. The private sector got involved, and we came up with a completely new model that actually has created a lot of success. So I think in terms of ecosystem, some of the ecosystem will completely reform themselves, but I'm quite sure that it will not be a long-term collapse. It may be a complete standstill now, but it's time we should not be looking at what to do in the next 90 days or 6 months. We should start planning what we should do when the 6 months is over. How are we going to create an ecosystem that's going to make things work for the economy in the future? So we should be thinking beyond that right now. If not, we will not be ready for it. Mariam, we got another 10 more minutes. You got any more questions for us?
Yeah, for sure. Nixon Cheambe from Cameroon, he is asking about what is the best strategy to get investors at this critical period? Generally, we have lots of questions about how to raise fund in this pandemic time. And for example, how the deal structures are going to change, and what about the valuations? That I think about the valuations you talked and covered. So about the strategies of negotiations and deal structure, please go on.
Okay. Well, I can do a quick one. I mentioned that a number of companies that I started during a downturn. I managed to attract investors at that point of time. And this was because of all the fundamental things that we talked about. So for startups, you have many fundamental things. The first one is a team. The second one is an opportunity, the technology that you may have, the business models that you may have. I think you go back to focus on those things and look at how you're going to be able to show that you're going to create a long-term business and a long-term market penetration that you can do is going to help you to do valuation. These are all very general things, but I think you have to go back to the basics of how you want to present yourself. Li Ka-shing had this saying, don't be over pessimistic in bad times, don't be over optimistic in bad times. There are opportunities all times. So investors and angel investors, many of them are looking for opportunities at this time. And if you have a good model and you can reform your model, I think you'll be able to find the investors. Any of the panelists want to add to this?
I would just suggest probably it's more likely that your existing investor base would be receptive to your request than going out looking for new investors. So probably one part of the game would be to again work your existing network of contacts and then try to make your point among those that already know you.
Yeah, I believe, yes, I agree totally with Professor Singh. You have to adapt. I don't think the finance will be a problem if your company will adapt to these new needs and these challenges, and if you are a good entrepreneur where you're going to present yourself good, maybe it is a good opportunity to look for investors, business angels or crowdfunding, I don't know, maybe this is something we have to look into WBAF, maybe how we can create that momentum. I think all of this learning curve now from WBAF, from these webinars, it may allow us, how to bring these new investments to entrepreneurs worldwide. But as I said, yes, we have talked about the problem and the crisis, but I think this crisis also will open a lot of opportunities for entrepreneurs if they will know how to adapt quickly, as Professor Singh have said, if they will manage to adapt quickly to these new demands, I think they can benefit from that.
Yes, yeah, totally on the same wavelength as well. I think another way of looking at answering this question is turning it on its head and looking at it from the perspective of an angel investor or an investor full stop. It's like, what would an angel investor be willing to put his or her money into now? What sort of business? And indeed, we're looking at businesses with strong intrinsic value. We're looking at the talent of the people behind it, and also seeing how comparing the before and after, how the entrepreneur has been able to adapt his or her strategy from the pre-COVID-19 situation to the post-COVID-19 situation. How is this person developing their team? How are they trying to open to new markets? How are they accelerating digital transformation? These are all questions which I would ask myself in the position of an angel investor, and therefore see who is the most adaptable, which means that this entrepreneur is also business savvy, forward-thinking and resilient, and survival in these times of crisis is what any investor is looking into right now. So those are the criteria I would recommend any entrepreneur to push forward right now in order to survive and to gain financing and funding.
Can I just add one more thing? That let's not forget that not just the banks and not just VCs or angel investors are the ones who can fund your business. Look at other stakeholders. Some of your suppliers may have interest in you surviving. Some of your customers need you to survive. So they are also your source of funding. In fact, the best source of funding is your customers buying from you. and your suppliers, working out a good deal with. So look beyond financial investors and look at the whole supply chain and see where you can partner with them. Everyone is in the same boat, and you may be able to find some opportunities. I think we've run out of time. I would like maybe each panelist to give a 1 to 2 minute wrap up, and then we'll call this off. Can we start with Dr. Hashim, please? Just a 1 to 2 minute wrap up before we end.
Well, I think the more I have even been thinking from now during this webinar and also from the discussion from my colleagues, I think I have a very good positive message to the entrepreneurs that this challenge can bring for you a lot of opportunities. As now also Mr. Singh said, it may be coming from your customers, may be coming from where you're buying the raw material, adapt. And we, as always, what we do when we do a challenge, because if you have a talented, well-skilled entrepreneur, going up and down, it makes him or her stronger. So I think entrepreneurs, yes, I know there are a lot of complexity. There is, as Kevin said, there is stress, there is fear in every house, in every human being, in every community. But, we should, entrepreneurs should think from a positive point of view. They have to look into the challenges. They have to bring these challenges into opportunities. And I can assure them
Yeah, something.
Okay, I think we have lost
Dr. Hashim is, I think, stopped.
Yeah, okay, Jacopo, maybe 1 to 2 minutes from you.
Yes, I would just like to reiterate the point that if we have to look forward and if we imagine and hope that there will be an economic recovery beyond this short-term period, I would assume that startups will be leading the economic recovery, which means that we have to support them. We have to support the startup ecosystem. We have, if I was an investor, my priority in this moment would be to keep good businesses alive and give them the tools to survive this short-term emergency, because they will be in a much better position to thrive once this short-term emergency, whether it be 6 months, 12 months, is over.
Thank you. Kevin, your last comments?
Thank you, and it's indeed been an honor this listening to all the other panelists has given lots of food for thought on it. And I agree with Jacopo, actually. In the next 2 years, going beyond the next 90 days, which as the question we had earlier, where we need to focus on the health crisis, the next 2 years will help us turn these challenges into opportunities for more sustainable economic growth, so we can hopefully have a strong and sustainable economic recovery in the future, even though there will be some degree of natural selection. Now, in my organization at JCI, we have a set of values, and one of them is that we believe that economic justice is best won by free men through enterprise and free enterprise. And this is something which is going to be very crucial as well over the next few months too. As I was saying in my opening remarks, we need to pay attention to what policymakers are going to do as well in terms of supporting startups and entrepreneurship in the future. And I do hope that we won't go back to a welfare state model with high taxation, where the first victims will be entrepreneurs in terms of them being taxed. So this is one thought I want to leave on. I also hope that entrepreneurships, and I believe that entrepreneurs should be positive, to be agile, and to adapt to grow in a responsible manner,
adapt to the new circumstances, make sure that we can focus on business with a heart as well, corporate social responsibility, sustainable development, female entrepreneurship, and gender equality as things which are going to be more and more prevalent, and of course sustainable cities in the developing and developed world as well. And these are things which investors will be more and more inclined to focus on in the future. So I do believe that the best is yet to come. We just need to stay strong. Everybody needs to play their part in building a better world in the future and getting beyond this crisis. Thank you.
Thank you. So let me maybe just wrap up by saying that Industry 4.0 was already upon us, and we were seeing disruptions in many areas, whether it was technology disruption, deglobalization, disruption of business models. So this was happening. I think this whole COVID incident has accelerated what may have happened in 5 to 10 years. It's happening now in the next 1 to 2 years. And so, we would have had to cross this bridge at one time or another, but now we're going to have to cross it earlier. And as most of our panelists have said, that we should be looking at adapting ourselves, all these opportunities in such an environment. The strong ones will survive. I think all entrepreneurs are agile, and we have done it before, and we will have to look for new models, new sources of financing. And I think WBAF can start thinking about some of those things. There were some questions that came in about blockchain-based crowd financing or VC models. I think that's something that WBAF can work on, and then how in such a disruptive environment we can help create that flow of financing. So I want to take this opportunity to thank our three panelists, Kevin, Jacopo, and Dr. Hashim, for their thoughtful views. It was really interesting. I enjoyed this discussion. I hope everyone else enjoyed it. Thank you so much, and have a good day, everyone.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye now.